Welcome to Earth Science Fun. Here's a quick guide for cutting and polishing small Thundereggs and Geodes. These specimens are old stock from Costilla County, Colorado. When cutting small stones, I recommend a 5-inch diamond-sintered trim saw blade. A notched rim blade will also work, but in my experience, sintered blades cut smoother, faster, and last much longer. The difference in price is worth it. Most blades are also made to go in one direction, so make sure if there is an arrow on your blade, it points the same direction the motor turns in. You'll also want to use a very thin blade. Here is a comparison with the 5-inch blade I'm using next to a 10-inch trim saw blade. A small kerf, or cut width, keeps you from losing too much material in the center of small Thundereggs. I recommend against using a tile saw blade since they are quite a bit thicker than most lapidary blades. A saw with adjustable RPM is also nice, as some models with a set RPM spin a bit too fast and this can cause stones to break. Also make sure your blade is rated for the RPM the saw operates at. Always wear a mask when doing lapidary work, and always cut wet. Cutting dry can damage equipment, heat and break stones, and mobilize hazardous rock dust. I use a respirator mask when I cut. A waterproof apron and goggles are also recommended, and you can use nitrile gloves or silicone fingertips if you want. Trim saw blades are smooth and won't cut you quickly like a table saw will, but it is still possible to cut a fingernail too short when sawing a stone. Also, if you have long hair, make sure it is tied back when you are around any rotary equipment. This includes trim saws and cabbing machines. Now it's time to cut. The saw I'm using is a high-tech trim saw with adjustable RPM. I run it on a fairly high setting for Thundereggs since the ones with agate cores cut slowly. Thundereggs often have lines on the outside, and those lines are an indicator for agate. Here is an exploded view of a Thunderegg to show what they may be like on the inside. This is generally accurate, but interiors can vary by specimen as well as locality. Most of my cuts are along the A or B planes, since cutting through the major plate and dimple often shows a nice cristobalite spheral in cross-section. Sometimes the cristobalite spherals also have some chatoyancy. Cutting along the C-plane can be good for some localities, since that can be the best way to cut through the most agate lines. I've seen some really neat star-shaped Thundereggs that were cut along the C-plane. I found those two diagrams on rocktumbling.com's article on orienting Thundereggs for cutting. Their guide is linked in the description, and I also recommend checking out the Geode Kids books if you want to see more in-depth studies on Thundereggs with lots of excellent photos. When cutting Thundereggs on a trim saw with a thin blade, you should start with very light pressure. Cutting a groove in the Thunderegg before you add more pressure helps reduce the chance of offsetting your cut. Too much pressure in general can cause the blade to bend or the cut to be offset. Letting the tool do the work will lead to the best results. If your stone is bouncing or rattling a lot during cutting, it might be because the blade or arbor of the saw is offset. In some cases, this can cause fractures in the agate, and you have to cut through a lot of material to remove them. This is more of a problem for larger agates and Thundereggs, but it is good to be aware of it. If you've been cutting Thundereggs for a while and you notice the cuts taking longer, the blade might be getting dull. A blade dressing stick is a quick and easy fix for this, and all you need to do is cut a small slice or two off the block and your saw should start cutting better as long as the blade isn't completely worn out. I'll cut a few more Thundereggs and then we can move on to polishing. For polishing, I'm using a Cab King 6-inch cabbing machine with res wheels. A flat lap would also work for flat polishing Thundereggs, but I don't have one on hand. Make sure your water supply is good and the wheel is wet before you start grinding. To use a cabbing machine for flat polishing, you'll want to rotate the Thunderegg as it is on the wheels. This will keep the surface flat as opposed to ending up with a dome or curved shape. Since my cuts were fairly smooth, I was able to start at 280 grit. You can also move the Thunderegg up and down a little bit, but be careful not to put the edge of the Thunderegg against the wheel. This will likely knock the stone out of your hand and into the tray and might damage your wheel. Between wheels, you should rinse your stone to prevent grit contamination. Next, I go to a 600 grit wheel. Res wheels have a textured surface as opposed to regular resin wheels, which are smoother. If you are cutting a large amount of stones, the texturing of res wheels speeds up the process. Res wheels do require a break-in period, and when you get them brand new, they are pretty sharp and pointy from the texturing. Be really careful if you have new ones that you are breaking in, and start off with a big piece of agate or something, so that your hands are further away from the wheel. Res wheels can and will cut you if they aren't broken in yet. Another rinse and it's on to the final step, a 3000 grit res wheel. Some stones such as tourmaline require 14,000 grit to really shine, but I find these small Thundereggs look about the same whether they are at 3000 or 14,000 grit. When you are starting out, it's also a good idea to look at the stone dry between steps, and see if you have scratches left over from previous grit stages. Patience pays off, and as you are learning, you will likely have to go back and repeat some steps. Eventually, you'll get the feel for how long each step takes, and checking the stone dry in between steps will help you know where you're at in the process. Here is a batch of small Thundereggs that I cut and polished. These really do vary from piece to piece, and I'd say roughly 85 to 90% of the Thundereggs that I cut from this locality have something interesting in the center. Sometimes pieces are too fractured, and sometimes you can get duds, which are solid spherules. Thundereggs from any locality are going to have some percentage of duds, and you never know what you're going to get until they are cut. It makes the really good ones a little more special. If you found this video helpful, please share it. Feel free to share your knowledge in the comments as well. I also sell minerals and fossils on my Etsy page if you'd like to support my channel and grow your collection at the same time. Thanks for watching and have a nice day.